So recently I built this, a 16-core Threadripper build with a 1080 Ti, a 360 and 280mm radiator in the new Define S2 from Fractal Design. In my opinion, this is what larger ATX cases should be used for, hardware that can actually populate the entire case and make use of all of that volume, and ideally feature a custom loop and several 3.5-inch drives. Now, we've also looked at much more compact cases like the DNA4 and the trusty Ncase M1, which can both accommodate powerful ITX systems that don't require more than 8 cores or a single GPU. These cases, on the other hand, are perfect for compact gaming machines. Now, let's say you like the compact nature and idea of something like the Ncase M1, but your build requires more powerful hardware like Threadripper, X299, or maybe even a multi-GPU setup. Well, meet the Cerberus and Cerberus X. They're both under 20 liters in volume, support up to 280mm radiators, ATX and SFX power supplies, and are available with a ton of add-ons and accessories. The Cerberus is 18 liters, can accommodate up to a micro ATX motherboard with sufficient radiator options, and the Cerberus X is for those with more demanding systems out there, supporting up to an eATX motherboard, expanding on radiator support, all in just 19.5 liters of space. Starting at $225 and $250 respectively, though they are not cheap and really do reserve themselves for those high-end systems. Now, we will be looking at them both today, given their similarities when it comes to design. They have the exact same footprint from the ground up, very similar compatibility and clearances, and chances are, if you're considering one of these cases, you should probably consider the other one as well. Now, despite the Cerberus and Cerberus X looking very similar to just a scaled up Ncase M1, they are in fact built and designed by different companies, with Chimera Industries behind the drawing board on this one, and they are manufactured in the US by a company called Sliger. I really do appreciate the simple and elegant design for both of these cases. They're not trying to do anything over the top here, and the design fits right in line with the Dan A4 and Ncase M1, which you guys know I'm a huge fan of. Here's what they look like side by side, with the backs of the cases all lined up, and it's fair to say that the Cerberus and Cerberus X are appropriately sized given their extensive hardware compatibility over the Dan A4 and Ncase M1. Here's what they look like next to the Meshify C, which is one of the most compact mainstream ATX cases that you can get your hands on today, which is also under half the cost of the Cerberus X, but then again, the Cerberus X is half the volume and offers superior radiator compatibility. I love the minimal front panel design, which is very reminiscent of the Ncase M1, but here we do have some tasteful side cutouts for front mounted fans and radiators, and we'll look at thermals in depth in just a bit. Build quality is pretty solid here as well and holds true to that Cerberus name. The frame is steel, with all panels being a powder coated aluminium alloy, which gives the panels a nice matte texture but is still slightly rough. 4 color options are available: white, black, red, and slate gray, and the side panel is ventilated in the stock configuration, but you can swap that to a window panel for a slight additional cost. The panel isn't tempered glass though, and is instead acrylic. Thankfully, it's not as awful as some of the acrylic that I've dealt with in the past. Still though, dust can be a real pain, and of course at this price we really should be getting that glass as an option. It's probably a good idea that glass wasn't used though, because the push pins that secure the panel to the frame are extremely tight. Let me just show you guys. See, if that was a glass panel, that would have shattered instantly. But the acrylic does have a bit of flex, so that's good to see. And with the current push pins being that tight, it is probably the best option that you can go with for a window kit at the moment. Also, if you are going with a ventilated side panel, the push pin layout is identical for the top and bottom, which means that you can flip the panel to either favor ventilation for a side-mounted fan or radiator or CPU cooler at the top, or switch to the bottom to favor your GPU. Of course, they could have ventilated the entire panel, but that wouldn't have looked as good, in my opinion. Feet are black rubber in the stock configuration, but you can upgrade to chrome feet if you like, but totally not worth the additional $40 in my opinion. One upgrade which is totally worth it though for improved portability is the top handle, allowing you to safely transport your case if need be. Obviously, it's a pretty unique use case that you would have to transport the Cerberus or Cerberus X, so I do appreciate that it's just an add-on for those who need it. Overall, it feels really sturdy. I also tested this with a fully populated system and there were no issues since that bracket mounts directly to the frame. Along with that top handle, you'll also get the fan bracket, which is included by default, as this is what the handle mounts to, but you can purchase this separately for an additional $10. If 2 top mounted fans is what you're after though, you can also add in the infinite vent top panel, which can accommodate up to 2 top mounted fans if you're using the front mounted power supply or a rear mounted SFX unit, but thickness here does depend on motherboard VRM heatsink height, so just keep note. Wooden top panels are also a thing, with the choice of walnut, mahogany, or curly maple if you want a more organic look to your build. And I will mention that you can mix and match the panels upon request. So for example, if you wanted to go for a mix of black and white, which I have on my personal build at the moment, that can be requested at no extra cost. Okay, so let's open up those panels and talk about compatibility, which is the serious strong point for these enclosures. So it all starts with the power supply mounting, as this will affect front mounted radiator support and CPU cooler height. The stock configuration has an SFX or SFX-L power supply mounted towards the front and top of the case. This would be my first preference, but if you absolutely need an ATX power supply, whether it be for more power overhead or more power connectors, you can mount an ATX unit in front of the motherboard towards the top left with the ATX mounting plate. An SFX or SFX-L unit will mount there as well with the SFX mounting plate. These plates will take $10 off of the final cost. If you do go with the front mounted power supply, you will gain the full 145mm CPU cooler height without the side bracket installed, and personally I find cable management a bit better, seeing as the connectors are in closer proximity to the components. Regarding air cooling for the Cerberus or Cerberus X, the most powerful option that I know of would be the Noctua C14S with a top mounted fan. There you're taking full advantage of that extra space with a cooler height of 142mm. So perhaps if you want to reserve the infinite vent mounting space for extra drive space, or if you just prefer air cooling overall, this would definitely be a great option. Now, going with the power supplies in the rear orientation, however, is recommended if you plan on running a front mounted radiator in either the Cerberus or Cerberus X, as it completely frees up that top portion, and water cooling is definitely the way to go here with a rear mounted power supply, as otherwise you are limited to a CPU cooler height of 75mm with the SFX unit in place, and just 48mm with the ATX unit. Not only does this leave you with not many powerful options, but the power supply will be starving the cooler of sufficient airflow. The stock configuration comes with this hinge side bracket, which will allow up to a 240mm radiator to be installed using the front mounted power supply configuration, or up to a 140mm fan or radiator to be mounted regardless of power supply mounting. And since we have that versatile rail mounting pattern, we can also mount additional 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives here with the brackets that can be purchased as add-ons. This allows for a multitude of possible configurations inside the Cerberus or Cerberus X, since the infinite vents are also on the bottom and front of the case. In the stock configuration, both the Cerberus and Cerberus X can support up to 2.5 inch drives at the front of the motherboard tray. Personally, this is okay for my use case, seeing as I only use a single 1TB SSD for my game library and current video projects, but I know a few people that would probably be disappointed by this restriction. Again though, by purchasing the add-on drive brackets, you at least have a serious amount of flexibility of where you want to mount those extra drives. Water cooling is where the Cerberus and Cerberus X really get interesting though, and for starters, both cases can accommodate up to a 280mm radiator at the bottom, and even the thickest of radiators will be fine here when using a single pair of full-size fans. Front mounted radiator support is stronger for the Cerberus X. It's able to accommodate up to a 280mm radiator with the radiator and fan thickness depending on how long your graphics card is, whereas the smaller Cerberus can fit up to a 240. In total, you've got 330mm of total card length to play with, allowing even the Asus Strix and EVGA For the Win 3 cards to fit, and still have room for 25mm thick fans at the front. For Founders Edition cards, both the GTX and RTX cards will fit no problem with a 30mm thick front mounted radiator and 25mm thick fans, with a few millimeters of extra wiggle room. I used an Asus GTX 1080 Strix in the Cerberus and had some clearance room in the front for a full-size fan, but I preferred to use that space for rounding the tubes of the AIO. Card height up to 152mm is supported, but keep in mind that will include the power connectors as well. That means that tall cards like the Gaming X from MSI will fit, but the power connectors will likely push up against that side panel. For those who want to run dual radiator builds and really push these cases to the limits, it can be done in both the Cerberus and Cerberus X. With the Cerberus, you can accommodate up to two 240mm radiators up to 27.5mm thick with 25mm thick fans. And in the Cerberus X, you're good up to two 280mm radiators up to 30mm thick with 25mm thick fans. Now, I didn't get around to testing an eATX motherboard in the Cerberus X, as my X399 Zenith Extreme is currently residing in the water-cooled Define S2 build I did a few days ago. But if you are using an eATX board, it is advised that you use a rear-mounted power supply. You may also run into conflicts with the stock drive mounting, and front-mounted radiator thickness is an important consideration as well. Now, let's talk about system thermals, and since the Cerberus X can accommodate up to an ATX motherboard, that allows us to transport our standardized test system in there and compare it to other cases. So here we've got a Ryzen 5 1600 at stock clock speeds, the Race Spire cooler, and an OpenAir GTX 1060 3GB. I also did add in a front-mounted 140mm fan, which was spinning at 1000 RPM for testing, and of course, two Noctua NFA 12x25s as bottom intakes primarily for the GPU. So, starting with CPU thermals with just a single 140mm intake at the front and bottom of the case, the top-down CPU cooler that we're using is fairly starved when it comes to airflow. It's not until we add the bottom intake fans that thermals here seem to be a bit more reasonable for our test configuration. We are using the ventilated side and top panels here, allowing for an active intake and passive exhaust setup, but adding in a 92mm fan at the rear of the case does help pull a lot of that hot air away. A similar result could be achieved with top-mounted fans configured as exhaust. For GPU thermals, it's imperative to be running bottom intake fans underneath your card, or at least a pair of front mounted fans that can get air directly to that cooler effectively. Otherwise, your card is going to be pretty starved for airflow. A single front intake fan just isn't going to cut it here. Once I installed those bottom intake 120mm fans pointed directly at the graphics card, we saw over a 5-degree drop in GPU thermals, allowing the GPU to now boost higher and operate at a higher clock speed. The 92mm exhaust didn't do a whole lot here, but was definitely worth it for the CPU. Now, in terms of build tips or recommendations, I decided to take my primary gaming and video editing system, which was otherwise residing on an open test bench for the last couple weeks, put it in the Cerberus, and man, am I happy with the results. So for starters, I decided to go with a front-mounted SFX power supply mainly for better cable management, and since I'm only running a single bottom-mounted radiator at this point, and custom length cables are definitely recommended if you're planning on going with that window kit. The motherboard is the Asus Strix Z370G. There's 32GB of Team Group Dark Pro memory clocked to 3200 MHz, and I've got my delidded 8700K overclocked to 5 GHz at 1.35 volts. That's being cooled by the NZXT Kraken X52 and a pair of Noctua NFA 12x25s, which I highly recommend and operate at near silence at 1500 RPM. Those are pointed directly at the GTX 1080 Strix that I'm currently using, which fits in there no problem at all. I've also got the matte white panels on there with the black top panel. Overall, a really tidy build that I'm really looking forward to using. I did some thermal testing here too, of course, since this will be my main workstation until I upgrade to new hardware. Temperatures here were really solid with my overclocked 8700K sitting comfortably below 70C in a 20-minute blender render with those Noctua NFA 12s barely making a sound, and the GTX 1080 Strix was sitting comfortably below 65 degrees C. So closing up this review, it's fair to say that I'm really impressed with what we can do here given the volume constraints, and that's usually the theme here for these space optimized enclosures. Another thing I'm really impressed with is just how versatile your build can be both in the Cerberus and Cerberus X, and the sheer amount of configuration options for your power supply, fans, radiators, and also additional drives. You really can build your system exactly how you like. Now, the ideal use case for the Cerberus and Cerberus X, in my opinion, is for those building compact workstations. Sure, you can build a gaming machine in these cases, but it's a bit going to waste. And in my opinion, that's where the Dan A4 and Ncase M1 really shine and come in if you're looking to build as compact as possible. Certainly nothing can defeat the Cerberus and Cerberus X in the workstation space though, if you are looking to build as compact as possible. The price, in my opinion, is a big factor of why I'm led to that conclusion and why I would personally withhold recommending it to those who are not building $2,500 plus machines. My configuration didn't require a ton of add-ons, only the $15 window kit, the vented side panel on the flip side, and then the matte white panels. But even then, that makes the Cerberus a $255 US case and $305 US if you wanted to do the same thing in the Cerberus X. The good news is that soon these cases will be available on newegg.com and sfflab.com, and from what I've heard, pricing will be a bit more affordable, making this a much more relevant option to those building mid to high-end systems, but not necessarily expensive workstations. In terms of the cases themselves though, there's no real complaints at all. I'm thoroughly impressed. The only things I'd like to see changed or improved for future revisions is the I/O wiring turned to straight black, and an actual tempered glass window kit would be really nice. Otherwise, these cases can make for the perfect compact workstation. And so let me know what you guys think of the Cerberus and Cerberus X, and if you happen to have one, I'd love to know what parts you're running down below. As always guys, a huge thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.